Every year, America enjoys the traditional feast known as Thanksgiving, and during this time, pumpkin and sweet potato pies sales spike. But did you know the history behind these beloved desserts and their connection to Northern abolitionists, Thanksgiving, and the holiday season as a whole? See, Thanksgiving pumpkin pie was once the hotly contested battleground in America's cultural war. In the 1800s, pumpkins and sweet potatoes became a totem in the fight to abolish slavery in America. The introduction of sweet potatoes to Western Africa in the 16th century was a very slow process. Initially, root vegetables such as cassava and yams were preferred over sweet potatoes. However, after the transatlantic slave trade, which helped spread the popularity of sweet potatoes in Europe and the Americas, it was only then that the African American community started using sweet potatoes because of their convenience. Western Africa is a yam based culture. While sweet potatoes are not the same thing as a tropical yam, enslaved people embraced them as a substitute in the absence of true yams. Before they had sweet potato pie, they had something called sweet potato pound, which is a corruption of the Native American word for baked bread. Enslaved people were eating roasted sweet potatoes cooked in the embers of fire and started spicing and mashing up sweet potatoes. As they got access to cooking technology and equipment like ovens, they started adding pie fillings, and the sweet potato pie was born. After slavery was abolished, African Americans began to migrate away from the southern United States in what was referred to as the Great Migration. During this time period, many African Americans brought along one of their favorite dishes, sweet potato pie, and it was introduced to other regions of the country. During the same time period, during the early 19th century, eating pumpkins and celebrating Thanksgiving became synonymous with identity politics. Abolitionist and pumpkin enthusiast and home economics pioneer Sarah Joseph Hale was the driving force behind the pro-Thanksgiving campaign. Hale campaigned for state-level Thanksgiving celebrations and was largely successful in the early 1800s, helping spur declarations for Thanksgiving in 29 states by 1850. But as the fight over slavery intensified and the Civil War loomed, people in the southern states began to reject what they saw as Northern cultural aggressions. The state of Virginia, in particular, wanted no part of Thanksgiving. In a letter to Hale, Virginia Governor Henry Wise, who was strongly pro-slavery, expressed his disapproval of New England abolitionist goals of referring to the theatrical national claptrap of Thanksgiving, which he said was used to encourage ministers to preach Christianity politics. Still, in 1863, Abraham Lincoln would declare the last Thursday in November as the National Day of Thanksgiving. Lincoln hoped that this holiday would serve in some way to heal the wounds of the nation and restore it. And since then, every president has kept that tradition alive. Still, some members of the Confederacy were unhappy with the Thanksgiving celebration and perceived it as a political move. They were especially unhappy with what they saw as a New Englander attempting to dictate how they should live. So for many years after the Civil War, Southerners refused to celebrate Thanksgiving and refused to eat pumpkin pie. It was not until after Reconstruction that Southern states began to accept Thanksgiving, and it wasn't until 1941 that Thanksgiving holiday was officially recognized in the federal law. So, in the absence of pumpkin pie, Southerners started cooking sweet potato pie made by formerly enslaved people. Pumpkin pie, despite its popularity, remained a Yankee food for many generations. It didn't gain widespread recognition across the South until the 20th century when television and supermarkets began to promote mass market pumpkin pie filling. The stereotype of African Americans being excessively fond of watermelons came during a specific period in history and was used to fulfill a specific political purpose. After slaves won their emancipation, they made watermelon a symbol of their newfound freedom by growing, eating, and selling it. Southern whites responded by using the fruit to depict African Americans as unclean, lazy, and childishness. This trope was so widely accepted within popular culture that the origins of it are almost forgotten. The trope of the racist watermelon didn't emerge until after emancipation. In the early 1900s, the European imagination associated the typical watermelon eater with Italians or Arabs. A British officer stationed in Egypt in 1808 described the watermelon as a poor Arab feast noting that the locals ate them ravenously as if the passers-by was going to snatch them away. Watermelon rinds were apparently a common sight on the streets of the port city of Rosetta. In Egypt, watermelon was also associated with uncleanliness, laziness, and childishness. These associations eventually made their way to America, but watermelon hadn't yet been connected to African Americans. In fact, at that time, Americans were just as likely to associate watermelons with white Kentucky hillbillies or New Hampshire yokels as they would a black South Carolina enslaved person. During chattel slavery, some plantation owners would allow their slaves to cultivate and even sell their own watermelons. Sometimes they would even give them a day off during the summer to enjoy their first watermelon harvest. Southern plantation owners viewed this slave's delight in watermelon as an indication of their own supposed compassion. Slaves were also careful to relish watermelon in a manner that followed the code of conduct established by whites. As a result, whites could expect slaves to act in a manner of a caricature of a watermelon-craving, juice-driven pickaninny. Refusing to comply with this stereotype could jeopardize the precarious relationship between master and enslaved. The abolishment of enslavement drastically altered the relationship between black people and whites. Formerly enslaved individuals avoided sharecropping on white-owned plantations by growing, consuming, and selling their own watermelons. This behavior of enjoying your freedom and cultivating your own land and selling watermelon in public markets provoked a major fear within the white community. Newspapers would then stoke this fear that whites have and strengthen the idea of African Americans having an affinity for watermelons. In 1869, Frank Leslie's illustrated paper published a cartoon of an African American eating a watermelon. The accompanying article stated that Southern African Americans have a strong liking for watermelon. They thoroughly enjoy eating it. 2 years later, a Georgia newspaper reported the arrest of a black man for allegedly poisoning a watermelon with the intention of killing his neighbor. The article compared the man's actions to that of the Ku Klux Klan and asked if the Republican Congressional Subcommittee investigating the Klan should look into this incident in particular. The article also described the man as walking to the courthouse carrying an enormous watermelon. Medical journals also wrote with a scientific earnest about black patients. They claimed that their intestines were clogged with watermelons. In an 1888 report by Dr. D.Z. Holliday of Harlem, Georgia, describing how he broke down a bowel instruction of an African-American man. He claimed that the mass was filled with 820 seeds, all of which the man had ingested in one night. Also, during the 1880 election season, Democrats accused South Carolina state legislature, which was majority black during Reconstruction, of having wasted the taxpayers' money on watermelons for their own enjoyment. In 1915, the white supremacist film D.W. Griffith, A Birth of a Nation, included a watermelon feast as a depiction of the emancipation, as corrupt northern whites encouraged former enslaved people to stop working and enjoy watermelons instead. This idea of implicating black appetites and black character through the watermelon, with the primary message being that African Americans were not ready for their own freedom, and that stereotype of associating blacks with watermelon remains a common occurrence in the United States even today. For example, in 1947, when Jackie Robinson broke Major League Baseball's color barrier, he was confronted by race-baiting taunts, including crowds throwing garbage, tomatoes, and watermelon rinds at him. Even in 1989, blacks protesting the killing of a black boy in Bensonhurst, New York, were taunted by whites, some of them holding watermelons over their heads and screaming at them to go home. There are literally hundreds of instances over the years where the watermelon in association with African Americans being used as a tool of insult. Even decades after the end of the Jim Crow era, this cultural symbol of blacks and watermelon continues.
Would you hire mid-tier celebrity Zach Woods to inspire your teams?
Now push your faces against each other.
Get ready for change, guys. Get ready for change.
Or just transform how they connect on an AI-powered teamwork platform? It's your choice.
60% of women experience side leaks with bladder protection underwear. Try Always Discreet. Its rapid dry core absorbs up to 25% faster than Depend and fits up to 95% of body shapes. Try Always Discreet, designed to protect.
Tide's boosted for school lunches. It's cleaner, whiter, brighter, and fresher.
We knew our last Verbo was going to be incredible. We didn't know the hot tub was broken. But thanks to Verbo Care and 24/7 live support, they moved us. Better place, better hot tub.
Got any room for Dad?
Think again, Bruce.
Teenagers are full of surprises. Verbo is not. If you know, you Verbo.
Are you Russia?
I am. I am.
Thanks for meeting me here. Usually not an interweb dating guy. Barely ever use this phone computer. Unless it's to bundle my insurance with Liberty.
Oh, same. I hate this thing, but it's true. You can save hundreds bundling with Liberty.
Liberty?
Liberty?
Liberty.
Are you hungry?
Mm-hmm.
Let's get some lasagna.
And some pay relief.
Only pay for what you need.
Crow laws enforced a racial segregation in the American South from the 1890s to the 1960s. Named after Thomas Rice and his minstrel character, Jim Crow Rice, these laws were designed to maintain racial hierarchy, and the laws covered every aspect of Black life, from voting rights to public transportation, and were strategically designed to marginalize African Americans. The insidious impact of the system extended beyond legal restrictions, seeping into social norms and customs that enforced a rigid racial hierarchy. One particular instance of Jim Crow's absurdity was the claim that Black people were prohibited from eating vanilla ice cream except on Independence Day. While there is no direct evidence refuting or confirming this claim, that's because there was no laws or ordinances that expressly banned African Americans from consuming ice cream. This claim seems to have emerged from the societal arena, where riddled with prejudice and unspoken practices. To understand this concept, it's crucial to delve into the idea of Jim Crow laws and how they were formulated and implemented. Jim Crow came in two forms: laws and etiquette. Southern states instituted a rigid system of segregation laws that limited access to public facilities, businesses, transportation, and even leisure activities. But etiquette was unwritten rules that dictated how African Americans should perform in white society. This varied from person to person, but some common norms was not being allowed to handshake a white male or display any friendly gesture to a white woman, avoid eating with whites, and if by chance they found themselves eating together, whites were to be served first. For example, in the book Behind the Backlash, White Working Class Politics in Baltimore, 1940 to 1880 by Kenneth Dunn, Dunn mentions that segregated dining was the norm and asserted that Black people could not eat vanilla ice cream in the presence of white people except on July 4th, when everyone could eat anything. Another example is Maya Angelou's biography, I Know What Cage Bird Sings. Maya Angelou shares that people in her hometown believed that white people were so biased against Black people that they couldn't even buy vanilla ice cream except on July 4th. Additionally, ice cream parlors were a social hub for white Southerners and typically off limits to Blacks. If they were served at all, they were relegated to a separate window and prohibited from eating on the premises. What the specific role that vanilla ice cream played in all of these customs seems to be a bit ambiguous. Perhaps the consumption of the popular flavor was merely seen as a privilege reserved for whites. Arguably, the restriction of vanilla ice cream could serve as a clear boundary between Blacks and whites and remind them of their secondary status. Vanilla ice cream seemed to have served as a metaphor of showcasing the unnerving realities of Jim Crow. And in light of this bias, African American community seems to have gravitated more towards butter pecan ice cream. Roasted peanuts were a favorite of Native American communities long before they were incorporated into desserts, but credit for popularizing butter pecan as a culinary delicacy goes to Black Southerners who were known to integrate pecans into traditional dishes, suggesting the familiarity and preference for the ingredient. During segregation years, pecans became an integral part of African American cuisine, especially in New Orleans. The city's cuisine was famous for their pecans, which was tossed with butter and brown sugar before being cast into many different culinary delights. This ultimately led to the introduction into ice creams as a way to implement more ice cream flavors. As African Americans produced, churned, and sold butter pecan through neighborhood parlors, this fostered a sense of community and shared identity and economic independence in these segregated spaces. Basketball player Shaquille O'Neal recounted in his 2001 autobiography, Shaq Talks Back, that his father scolded him for wanting vanilla ice cream and insisting that they only ate butter pecan. Celebrity chef Gerby Garvin recalled that butter pecan ice cream became a regular part of his family's tradition, and former NFL player Albert Hainsworth recalled that butter pecan was the flavor of black people. In the end, the Jim Crow laws and resulting racial etiquettes created a severe societal divide in the southern United States. And even in the context of something as simple as just consuming ice cream, while there's no actual law that prevented African Americans eating vanilla ice cream, there are enough personal stories that indicate that this etiquette practice did exist, at least in some forms, in the southern United States. And the rise of butter pecan as the African American flavor of choice exemplifies our resiliency in the face of adversity. And it's a testament how African Americans continue to communicate their culture through our foods. The origins of barbecue as we know it can be traced back to native tribes in the Caribbean and their indigenous cooking methods. The first Spanish colonizers embarked on their New World voyages in the 15th century. They were fascinated by the techniques employed by the indigenous Taino people. The Native Americans would slow cook their meat over wooden structures over a pit of fire. This method was termed barbacoa, and this enthralled colonizers so much they incorporated barbacoa into their Spanish lexicon, with it eventually becoming the word barbecue. The story of barbecue doesn't end with Spanish colonizers. These explorers took the cooking method of barbacoa with them to North America, where it was adopted by the local people and colonizers alike. The first known written mention of pork barbecue was around Mississippi. The book, The Historical Roots of the Yaclacapapa, 1540, 1962, authors Don Harrison Doyle wrote in December of 1540, near present-day Tupelo, Mississippi, the explorer Hernando de Soto and the Chickasaw tribe had a feast of Spanish cooked pork using the barbacoa method. By the 16th and 17th centuries, barbecue had become an integral part of everyday life in the southern part of North America, where there's even a painting from 16th century French explorer Jacques Lemoyne that shows Native Americans in Florida using a wooden frame over burning logs to cook a variety of foods like fish, mammals, and reptiles. George Washington, who was once charged with procuring meat for his soldiers during the French and Indian Wars, even talked about barbecuing in the Indian manner. With the arrival of enslaved Africans to the Americas in the 16th century, this caused a significant shift in the cultural and culinary landscape. Forced to adapt to a strange new environment, these Africans learned to sustain themselves through ingenious methods. They closely observed the cooking methods of the Native Americans, specifically the technique of barbecuing. This slow-cooked method was ideal for larger cuts of meat, which made it popular for communal gatherings. It's around this time that the groundwork was laid for the Southern style of pit barbecuing. However, the adaptation from the Native American techniques of suspended racks to in-pit barbecue is very murky. There is scant written references from the 18th century to shed light on this evolution. But despite the lack of documentation, it's plausible that this move into the ground was an inevitable progression. Around the same time was the introduction of unique African flavors and cooking techniques into barbecue by the enslaved community. Enslaved Africans didn't just learn Native American techniques of barbecuing, but they contributed their own. The process of smoking meat over a gentle flame. It was a common practice in several African cultures and was originally designed to preserve the freshness of meat. This method eventually fused with the open pit cooking style that formed the basis for the barbecue style that we know today. Southern barbecue would gain popularity around the mid-1700s on Virginia plantations and then slowly make its way south from there. However, it's important to know that barbecues were not a regular event, but they were organized around holidays, special events, and political gatherings. Adrian Miller, the author of Black Smoke, a book around the history of black barbecue, would state that by the 1830s, people believed that a proper barbecue required an African American cook and his team. Barbecue was seen as a black experience. Furthermore, because African Americans popularized pit cooking, they earned the title of pit master. Originally, pit masters were the elderly slaves that were proficient in cooking who supervised the barbecue preparation. Later on, the term pit master will become known more broadly. One of the earliest known references to a pit master was published on September 22nd, 1939 in the Daily Times News in Burlington, North Carolina. They wrote that Jeter Crutchfield, pitmaster, will supervise the beginning of a roasting pork for barbecue tonight at midnight. This is the first known use of the word pitmaster in print. And now, Jeter Crutchfield was a white man, and it was not uncommon for white men to be the face of local barbecue. But more often than not, the ones doing the actual work were African Americans. It's also important to note that the article specifies that Jeter will supervise. But regardless, it tells us that the term pitmaster has become so wrapped into a lexicon that it's found its way into a newspaper article by the 1930s. What makes enslaved Africans' adaptation to barbecue so ingenious was that it was built amongst their limitations. Barbecue is a complex, laborious process that requires mastery and precision, from building an adequate fire to keeping consistent temperature for hours to expertly handling the meat to achieve a perfect blend of texture and flavor. They were often provided the least favorable, tougher cuts of meat, and these skilled chefs used this knowledge of seasoning and slow cooking to render these tough, overlooked cuts of meat delicious. By the Civil War, Southerners had been barbecuing for almost 2 centuries, and a great many of these cooks were African American slaves who tended these pits and barbecues organized for the white community as well as events for their own family and friends. Sunday was often a day of rest and church sessions. This day became when enslaved people would barbecue for themselves. Thus, barbecue culture became an integral part of African American traditions. Today, celebrations like Juneteenth often center around barbecue, underlying the importance of barbecue within black culture. After the Civil War, thousands of talented cooks in rural areas and small towns brought their barbecue tradition to hungry Southerners. Such examples was an African American cookbook author by the name of Abby Fisher, who was born into slavery in South Carolina in 1832 and shared her cooking skills while on plantation kitchens. After she obtained her freedom, she published a cookbook in 1881 named What Miss Fisher Knows About Old Southern Cooking. The cookbook does not contain any barbecue recipes, which is understandable because barbecuing was traditionally done by men outside in pits. However, one barbecue recipe stands out. It is called game sauce. The recipe calls for stewing a peck of plums after removing the stones with onions, vinegar, sugar, cayenne, black pepper, cinnamon, and salt, simmering the mixture for a full day, and she states that she will have the best barbecue sauce in the world. In the years after emancipation, black barbecue traditions continued. While the names did not make the newspaper or other historical records, being a pitmaster was a high demand skill. And as freed African Americans began to form their own communities, they passed down this craft to the younger generations, and those traditions became integral into black culture. Over time, black cuisine and barbecue tradition became an essential part of larger American society, particularly in the southern United States, where it is now known as Southern barbecue. However, this adoption came with issues like cultural appropriation and accommodation. Today, barbecue has become increasingly popular within mainstream American society. It's considered an integral part of American cuisine. However, the widespread recognition often overlooks and glosses over the origins within black culture. As a result, the origins of barbecue is often changed or even completely forgotten. Also, barbecue has become an increasingly profitable business. And with this, its cultural significance is washed away in a wave of commercial interest. Often mainstream American barbecue business cherishes barbecue as purely American while hiding the black history behind its influence. Despite the appropriation, the authorization, and accommodatization, the tradition of barbecue still holds a special place within black culture. It represents unity, resistance, strength, and freedom. This deep cultural meaning can be seen at black family reunions, church gatherings, and other social events where barbecue is a crucial element. Moving from a survival strategy in enslaved black communities to a popular American tradition, barbecue shows the strength of shared culinary traditions and how they influence America's cultural identity.
Mix, match, or happy with Gain.
Get in on our epic savings event at Firestone Complete Auto Care.
We put preference level of shine on. This is a hot flash. This is a not flash. This.
Kentucky Fried Chicken goes all the way back to ancient Rome. A Roman cookbook named Abacus was the first to suggest the recipe of fried chicken. However, it was the Moors who truly developed and refined the art of fried chicken in the Mediterranean. Traditional fried chicken, as we know it, has its origins in two distinct cultures, Scottish and West African. The Scots were the first to introduce the idea of fried chicken, which was quite different from the usual European cooking methods of baking and broiling. There was evidence that the Scots had been deep frying poultry in fat since the Middle Ages. An interesting piece of evidence from 1773 diary of the writer James Boswell wrote about a dinner he had in the Isle of Skye, which included fried chicken. One of the very first known written recipes of fried chicken comes in a British cookbook entitled The Art of Cookery, Made Plain and Easy by Hannah Glass in 1747. The recipe, loved by both British and the American colonies, in the recipe calls to cut 2 pieces of chicken into quarters, lay them in vinegar 2 to 4 hours with salt, pepper, a bay leaf, and cloves of garlic in very thick batter. First with a half a pint of wine and flour, then 2 egg yolks, melt a little butter, grated oregano, some chopped parsley, beat very well, dip your fowls in the batter, and fry them up in a good deal of hog lard. While it was Scottish immigrants who first introduced fried chicken to the United States, they were definitely not the ones that popularized it. That was done by Western Africans. During that time period, Western Africans were very familiar with cooking chicken, and they usually used a braising technique. However, once in America, enslaved Africans used their culinary traditions to introduce the concepts of seasoning and spices and imbue the flavor and zest into an otherwise mundane dish. See, at the time, the Scots weren't putting any seasoning in their fried chicken. Upon arrival, enslaved people found themselves in an alien landscape amidst an unfamiliar food and culinary norms. Nonetheless, they were expected to utilize the ingredients that were accessible to them while continuing to draw on their deep culinary traditions. African culinary habits brusquely featured poultry and fowl, and chicken played a significant role, making this an easily adaptable ingredient when they reached the New World. Their culinary skill and ingenious improvisation of the enslaved people played a huge role in the growth and popularity of fried chicken. They combined their African cooking techniques with already available ingredients in America to create something completely different. For example, West African cultures use palm oil most often for fried foods. However, in America, enslaved Africans had to switch to using lard or pig fat, the fat of other animals, to fry chicken. This was because those ingredients were more readily available and less expensive. Chickens also played a significant part in the lives of enslaved people. Chickens were amongst the free animals that enslaved people were permitted to keep and care for, and they became a key part of their meals. Raising chickens was manageable and presented enslaved people with an opportunity to express some level of independence. Chickens also had economic importance because sometimes enslaved people were allowed to trade or sell their surplus eggs and meat for other goods. However, if a chicken fell sick or died, enslaved people were forced to eat it to avoid wasting the food. Therefore, they came up with the idea of cleaning and seasoning the meat, then frying it in hot oil. During slavery, fried chicken was a luxury reserved for special occasions. Although the recipe is extremely simple, preparing it took a lot of time, effort. Not everyone had access to the right kitchen tools or even access to available poultry. Still, as more and more people tasted fried chicken, it began to disseminate across the South. And by the end of the Civil War, the connection between African Americans and fried chicken was already firmly established. In the period following the Civil War, mass-produced fried chicken and inexpensive oils became readily available. However, during the same time period, racial laws restricted employment opportunities for African Americans, particularly women. So they resorted to selling their homemade fried chicken, often considered Sunday meal, to travelers. This economic strategy helped propagate Southern railways and therefore solidified fried chicken as a Southern staple and a nationwide symbol. The best example of this took place in Gordonville, Virginia. Despite this small town of only 900 residents, Gordonville, Virginia was an important stop for two major railroad lines. During that time period, trains did not have dining cars, so passengers had to figure out how to feed themselves, and some would pack their own food, while others chose to purchase meals during their trip. Spotting a business opportunity, African American women used to sell their homemade food to passing travelers. They would serve fried chicken, pies, and biscuits, and deliver them to the hands of passengers on a platform through the train windows. The women were known as waiter carriers. But by the turn of the century, the majority of the trains began to equip with dining cars, and governmental regulations became more stringent for platform food vendors. And as a result, this innovative business tradition had to come to an end. During the Great Migration, many African Americans moved from the South to northern industrial cities. And they took their food traditions with them, including their beloved fried chicken that reminded them of their former homes. Over time, African Americans started to eat fried chicken as a staple meal after church. They also would serve the best part of the chicken, typically the breast, to the pastors as they visited the home. During this time, chicken would become known by gospel bird or the Sunday cluck. This would continue up until around World War II, when fried chicken was still only being enjoyed on special occasions. It was still a relatively labor-intensive process. But by the 1950s, the popularity of fried chicken exploded due to the rise of fast food chains. Many entrepreneurs in the fast food industry saw America's passion for fried chicken and decided to capitalize on it. Companies started to brainstorm ways to quickly cook up a massive amount of fried chicken and serve them fresh to their customers. It was during this time period that fried chicken went from being a national American dish to an international dish. However, it was also during this time period, during the Jim Crow era, where racial stereotypes between African Americans were closely tied to fried chicken, asserting black folks as poultry thieves and ravenous eaters of fried chicken. This portrayal cast African Americans as inherently savage and unintelligent, as predatory, lustful beings who exhibited primal, uncontrollable affection for food, particularly fried chicken. In 1915, the film The Birth of a Nation popularized the trope of African Americans as chicken thieves, painting them as dim-witted and lazy. In one scene, elected black officials were seen swigging from whiskey bottles and putting their bare feet on tables, while another man is seen ravenously gnawing on a chicken bone. Such imagery permeated deep into the 19th century, and these stereotypes continuously showed in various types of movies and media, TV shows, and advertisements. These often showed African Americans indulging in specific types of foods like fried chicken and watermelon. This was propagated to the point to insinuate that African Americans were less intelligent and highlighted white society's perceived cultural and racial superiority. This stereotype was often employed with the humor trope to belittle blacks, thus underscoring black people's subjugated status. In today's world, the stereotype persists, and the media plays a significant role in establishing and perpetuating and amplifying these stereotypes. Racist depictions, minstrel shows, and negative portrayals in modern advertisements, media contributed significantly towards the racial myth-making of fried chicken. Even as attempts to counter these negative stereotypes, the contemporary media, old tropes occasionally resurface and underline the persistent cultural baggage that fried chicken seems to carry. In 2010, a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial in Australia depicted a white person calming down a rowdy crowd of black people with fried chicken. While the ad was labeled as racist, it's also seen as an example of exactly how these stereotypes continue to spread. It forced KFC to apologize publicly and pull the ad. However, despite these stereotypes propagating in the media, many African American chefs and food writers have made efforts to attempt to reclaim the narrative and highlight the historical and cultural significance of fried chicken and continue to elevate Southern traditional meals, including fried chicken, to the realm of gourmet cuisine. And the success of black-owned businesses shows that African American entrepreneurs can succeed despite these stereotypes. Strides are being taken to dismantle these stereotypes. The work is ongoing. As historian Michael Twitty points out, fried chicken is a soul food classic, but it's not the whole of African Americans' culinary heritage. Nonetheless, fried chicken continues to remain a staple in many African American gatherings and celebrations, and resembling resilience, resourcefulness, and culinary creativity amidst a history fraught with hardship and repression.
Kellogg's cereal. 4 simple ingredients plus vitamins and minerals. That's it.
Downy April Fresh gives you a whole week of freshness with just one wash.
Booking.com has all kinds of stays because some want a house in the desert. Others do not. Find exactly what you're booking for. Booking.com, booking.yeah.
This is Buick now. Buick, exceptional by design.
Macaroni is a dried, molded pasta traditionally made from wheat flour and water. Its origins back to ancient Greece. The term macaroni comes from the Greek word for maker, meaning blessed. The pasta became an integral part of the Mediterranean diet and subsequently permeated this way through Greek, Roman, and Arabic cultures. However, the inclusion of cheese into the equation did not come into existence much later in Europe. First known recipes for a macaroni and pasta type dish was de lasagne, which required layering sheets of pasta with cheese and spices. It can be found in one of the oldest Middle-Age cookbooks called The Form of Curry, which was compiled by cooks of England's King Richard II in the 14th century. However, a more recognizable form of the dish originated in Italy, where certain types of pastas and cheese in a casserole were documented all the way back to the 13th century Italian cookbook called the Liber de Cucina. But macaroni and cheese, as we know it, was introduced to the Americas by Thomas Jefferson, but he didn't cook the dish himself. During his tenure as an envoy in France, Thomas Jefferson enjoyed a similar type pasta dish in France, and he commissioned his enslaved black cook by the name of James Hemings to learn how to make it. James Hemings was the older brother of Sally Hemings, who was also the half-brother of Jefferson's deceased wife. In 1784, when Hemings was just 19 years old, he traveled with Jefferson and his daughter to Paris. In Paris, James trained under different French chefs. Over the next 5 years, he became a master of French cooking and got particularly good at cooking macaroni pie. This was a creamy pasta dish that eventually turned into what we know as macaroni and cheese. The recipe involved using whatever cheese he had on hand, layering it in between buttered macaroni mixed with milk. He would then cook it in a Dutch oven, which he placed over a fireplace, and hot coals would be placed over the lid to bake the macaroni and cheese. Even though Hemings' crucial contribution to cooking and he was famous as a chef, he remained relatively unknown. This was because he was still enslaved under Thomas Jefferson until 1796, and he was one of only 2 slaves that Jefferson set free, and that was only under the condition that James would teach his younger brother Peter to take over in his place as Jefferson's cook of the household. Peter Hemings would then serve the dish at a state dinner in 1802, making it famous. Unfortunately for James, he would pass away at 36 in 1801, but Hemings' most important impact on American food culture was his introduction, macaroni and cheese. Adrian Miller, who's the author of Black Smoke, African American in the United States of Barbecue, explained about Hemmings that its story is a metaphor for African American cooking and our experience in this country. It's the story of innovation and virtuosity. Often African American cooks get overlooked for our contributions and our accomplishments. In the early 19th century, the dish we call macaroni and cheese was primarily a food of the elite. This was because dried macaroni was not commonly accessible and Americans didn't know how to make good quality pasta. In addition to this, Italian cheeses, which was a key ingredient in macaroni and cheese, was too expensive for most Americans. As the century progressed, the Industrial Revolution dramatically changed the accessibility and the popularity of mac and cheese in the United States. The production process in making macaroni and cheese became more affordable and more widely available, made it more popular with the lower classes. The establishment of the first cheese factories in this country amplified the production of cheddar cheese, which soon became the common ingredient in macaroni and cheese, thus making the meal even more suitable for poor communities. It was during this time we also see macaroni and cheese lose its Italian and French origins and become a more crucial part of Western cooking. For the African American community, after emancipation, the dish bore two distinct identities and varied in significance. One was a quick side dish for weekdays, and the other was a more elaborate meal celebrated for Sunday suppers. It was during this time period that macaroni and cheese evolved in the South among African American communities and became what we know as baked macaroni and cheese. This dish was also based in hard times when the Black community desired to dress up their macaroni and cheese, thus began a tradition of baking layers of macaroni and cheese. During the Great Migration, where African Americans moved from the South to northern industrial centers, this continued to spread in the popularity of macaroni and cheese, thus making it a well-known dish within the Black community across the United States. Additionally, it was Black women, first the enslaved, then later domestic workers, that were instrumental in the dish's trajectory. Their cooking skills and knowledge greatly impacted how this dish had evolved, reinforcing the role of Black women in shaping American cuisine. With macaroni and cheese becoming a common dish among Black families, it began to reflect the craft and ingenuity of these Black women. Its importance within the culture was so high that sometimes a family member's approval was needed before it could be cooked for special occasions. In 1918, there was a Swiss invention that changed the food industry forever. It was processed cheese. Over the years, this innovation led to products we recognize even today, such as Kraft Singles, Easy Cheese, powdered sauce that comes in the mac and cheese box, and of course Velveeta. This is when macaroni and cheese really took off. In 1937, Kraft launched its boxed macaroni and cheese. It was a cost-effective meal choice in one simple box. Priced at only 19 cents, it could feed a family of four. Consumers responded strongly to the reliable, affordable meal option, and in just 1 year, Kraft sold 8 million boxes of boxed macaroni and cheese. During World War II, food rationing and tight domestic spending, this made Kraft boxed macaroni and cheese even more appreciated as a food staple. Shoppers found that they could purchase 2 boxes of macaroni and cheese with only 1 food stamp. It was during these years that boxed macaroni and cheese earned its reputation as American treasured comfort food. Macaroni and cheese became a reflection of the United States with its convenient packaging and industrialization. It was the ideal American food. Pasta and processed cheese were very cheap to make, it was easy to ship and store, and it was very filling. While African American families did opt for this cheaper, easier to make meal, they didn't relinquish the tradition of preparing baked macaroni and cheese from scratch for special occasions. Macaroni and cheese continued to be an essential part of family gatherings and special meals in the Black community, particularly during holidays such as Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was considered more than an everyday comfort food. It was an integral part of celebratory feasts and cherished symbolic representation of the community cohesion. While there are many ways to prepare this dish, there was a standardization of the recipe that happened in Black kitchens in the 50s when it was referred to as soul mac and cheese. This consists of macaroni, a substantial portion of cheese, butter, milk, often topped with breadcrumbs or cheese, which is baked to achieve a golden crust. During the 60s, mac and cheese became an even more integral part of the community. It was a symbol of the community's strength and unity. During this time of the civil rights movement, mac and cheese was a common dish at gatherings and meetings, and women who were referred to as movement mothers handed down coveted recipes and their techniques, and mac and cheese became to symbolize more than comfort food. It stood as an emblem of community strength, unity, and resistance in the face of racial inequalities and systemic prejudices. That tradition continues today, with mac and cheese still being a significant part of Black cultural cuisine. Its ceremonial presence during the holidays and family gatherings and religious events, it goes beyond just a hearty pasta to a cultural icon that has ingrained itself in our shared history and identity. Despite the stereotypes and stigma that continue to categorize mac and cheese as an unhealthy soul food, mac and cheese continues to evolve in Black kitchens. Chefs keep adding their own twist to the classic recipe while respecting its historical importance. They continue to reinvent this comfort food and inserting their own personal touches that reflects Black culinary innovation and heritage. Thomas Jefferson was a founding father in the United States, but he was also a plantation owner and over his lifetime owned over 600 enslaved individuals. At his peak, he owned 140 enslaved individuals at his Monticello estate, one of these being the Hemings family. The intricate relationship between the Hemings lineage and Thomas Jefferson is predominantly traced back to Jefferson's union with Martha Wayland. This marriage brought the Heming family into Jefferson's life, primarily as part of the estate that he inherited from Martha's father, John Wayland. The connection between Martha and the Hemings extends beyond mere ownership. They share a common parental lineage through Elizabeth Hemings, who was an enslaved woman who was enslaved by Wayland and bore several of his children. This shared ancestry ties Martha and Hemings together through bloodlines and bondage. Within this complex relationship, James Hemings and Sally Hemings stand out as central figures embodying the deeply intertwined destinies between the Hemings family and Thomas Jefferson. James Hemings was born in 1765. He was one of the children of John Wayland. This familial link thus made him Jefferson's brother-in-law when Martha was married to Jefferson. Despite the constraints of his enslaved status, Hemings was able to carve out a niche for himself within the hierarchical structure of the Monticello estate, particularly through his refinement and expertise of his culinary talents. His sister, though, Sally Hemings, is the more widely recognized due to her complex relationship with Thomas Jefferson. After Martha Jefferson's demise, there was a lot of conjecture concerning the intimate relationship between Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. These allegations suggested that Jefferson fathered several of Hemings' children, and the emergence of DNA evidence in 1998 led credence to the assertion that Jefferson likely fathered at least one, if not all, of Sally Hemings' children. But that's a story for another day. James Hemings, though, from his youth, exhibited a proficiency for literacy, which was rare given the prevalence of anti-literacy statutes that prohibited the education of enslaved individuals. Thomas Jefferson recognized Hemings' potential and chose to cultivate it, driven not by benevolence, but by a desire to increase the value of his enslaved property. This investment exhibited his extraordinary culinary talents and remarkable use of his acquired skills despite the constraints of his bondage. Jefferson, recognizing his talents when James was 19, he embarked on a significant journey from Boston to Paris with Thomas Jefferson and his sister Sally. Following Jefferson's appointment as America's trade minister in 1784, Jefferson facilitated his apprenticeship under esteemed chefs at the Chateau de la Chantilly, a culinary establishment that was unparalleled in its reputation during the 18th century. This apprenticeship was a privilege seldom afforded to even the local French population, providing Hemings with a comprehensive education in the intricacies of French cuisines, from pastry making to the art of sauce preparation and the nuances of kitchen management. While in Paris, James was appointed as the chef of cuisine at Jefferson's private home, the Hotel de Jack, where he supervised a kitchen team, including white servants. This contrasted greatly with his life in America. Despite earning half of what the previous chef made, James managed to impress everyone with his skillful blending of French and American techniques, resulting in unique cuisine. He also used a part of his wages to hire a tutor and learn French. James and Sally would soon discover that a French law allowed slaves to seek freedom upon stepping on French soil. Still, they didn't take advantage of this law, possibly because they wanted to avoid being separated from their family back in the United States. In 1789, the Hemings siblings and Thomas Jefferson traveled from France back to America, specifically to Jefferson's Monticello estate. While in America, Hemings worked Jefferson's personal chef and received wages for his work. As the national government moved around in what would become the United States of America, so did Jefferson and Hemings. They lived in New York City for a time, with Hemings running the kitchen there, and Philadelphia in 1791. Hemings put his culinary skills to use, using the knowledge gained in France. Hemings brought French culinary techniques to create uniquely American foods. It was during this time, while residing in Philadelphia, a state where slavery was abolished, that James initiated negotiations with Thomas Jefferson for his emancipation. Recognizing his culinary prowess, Jefferson consented to his manumission with a condition. He had to pass on his cooking expertise to another enslaved individual. Hemings handpicked his younger brother Peter for this role. This choice fulfilled two desires. First, he would finally be free, and secondly, it would help his brother Peter lead a better life under the circumstances. For 2 years, Hemings taught Peter everything he knew about cooking, so Peter could continue to make meals at the Jefferson estate. In 1796, when he was 31 years old, Jefferson finally signed his emancipation papers, and Hemings had a chance to start a new life. So now, a free man, Hemings faced the daunting task of making his own way in 18th century America. He left the Jefferson estate of Monticello and settled in cities like Philadelphia and Baltimore, where he lived among other free blacks and worked as a professional chef. Despite his liberty and his impressive culinary skills, his freedom did not shield him from the realities of 18th century America. Unfortunately, there are only a few records to shed light on his experiences after he was set free. But what we do know is that in his strange twist of fate, Hemings found himself once again in a dialogue with Thomas Jefferson. When Jefferson requested Hemings' service for a second time, Hemings responded through Francis Sayers, another chef who he had worked with in New York and Philadelphia. Hemings indicated that he was willing to work with Jefferson, but felt uncomfortable about the prospect of working with unfamiliar servants. He asked Jefferson to write him directly, outlining the terms and conditions of the job offer. While Jefferson never wrote back, Hemings did briefly work in Monticello for about a month and a half in the kitchen, earning about $30 before moving on. The trajectory of James Hemings' life took a dark turn in 1801 when he died under very curious circumstances. It's widely believed that he committed suicide, and the factors that would compel him to take his own life were completely speculative. It's postulated, though, that his personal adversities, possibly including being ostracized from his family and the challenges of navigating a prejudiced society, might have overwhelmed him in his final years. James Hemings had a profound effect on American cuisine, and one of his biggest achievements was just introducing foods like ice cream, mac and cheese, creme brulee, and French fries to America. He brought back many recipes from France and added his own spin using ingredients that he could find here in the States. For example, the classic mac and cheese is linked to a similar dish in France called macaroni pie. He then made his own version in America, and it became popular when his brother Peter served it at a state dinner in 1802. Hemings also had a knack for making sweet treats. He used vanilla, sugar, cream, and an egg yolk to make fancy but extremely hard to make ice cream that was a big hit at Jefferson's parties. Another French dish that he brought back to American tables was French fries. Hemings tasted those in France, tweaked the recipe to make his own American version, and added it to the menu in Monticello. Jefferson started promoting them, and French fries became a popular dish all over the country. Beyond specific dishes, Hemming's broader influence lies in his role of blending French and culinary practices with American ingredients. This fusion approach laid the groundwork for what is now being celebrated as American cuisine, a melting pot of various techniques from other countries and traditions. Hemmings proved that American dishes could possess the refinement and complexity of European cuisine while celebrating local ingredients and tastes. Hemmings, who spoke both French and English, left behind important notes to help us learn more about his legacy beyond his cooking skills. These documents found at the Library of Congress include a list of kitchen tools, his own handwriting, and some recipes that he had created. They show us that Hemmings was a very talented chef and offer us a glimpse into his fascinating life. Today, Hemmings is finally getting the recognition that he deserves for his impact on American cuisine. His influence is being showcased at his exhibits and at food events that honor his memory and celebrate his role in shaping early American cuisine. This new understanding goes beyond his knowledge and his cooking abilities and is a meaningful tribute to all the enslaved individuals like Hemmings, whose contributions to American culture often go ignored and forgotten.
Bundle and save on insurance through Liberty Bippity.
Swim.
Swims? Oh, I love those birds.
This game is once in a century. Be there at Capital One Arena on March 7th. Go to HarlemGlobetrotters.com for your tickets to the 100-year tour.
Collard greens are a dark green leafy vegetable that's popular around the globe for their taste and their high concentration of vitamins A, C, and K. Collard greens are some of the oldest members of the cabbage family, also known as the tree cabbage. Originating in the Eastern Mediterranean, the name collard is derived from colewort, which means the cabbage plant. Despite their name, collard greens do not grow tight heads like cabbages. Indeed, they are part of the cabbage family, but they're more closely similar to kale. Collard greens were made popular in Europe by the Greeks and the Romans. Ancient Greeks grew kale and collard greens together and made little distinction between the two. Historians are unsure on whether or not Romans discovered greens through the Greeks or if they started growing them independently. When the Romans went on their conquest of what is now the United Kingdom, they introduced collard greens to European diets around the 4th century BC. Their introduction to Africa, however, comes long before transatlantic slave trade and became a dominant part of African people's diets even to this day. Many countries in Africa, especially those in Eastern Africa, love the green leaf vegetable, which is known as sukuma wiki. Preparing the collard greens often involves boiling or steaming as they are served as accompaniments to either meat or fish. They can also be supportive ingredients in soups and stews or with other vegetables. After becoming a staple of European diets, collard greens were brought to the Americas by European settlers in the 17th century. This happened during a period known as the Columbian Exchange, which is an historical event involving the transfer of various goods, animals, plants, people, and even diseases between Europe, West Africa, and the Americas. Collard greens were loved in the southern part of the United States because other plants struggled to grow during cold winter